Hello, Sonor family. Jules here with Sonor Talk, and today we've got Ron Wikso. Ron has been a Sonor endorser for about 35 years, and Ron's got a very dynamic background with a large range of artists over the years and all that. We're going to touch on a good bit of that today. Welcome, Ron.
Well, thank you for having me.
I, I hope you don't
Happy to
have
be
a,
here.
yeah, glad to have you. And I'm glad, I hope you're not sitting there in the wind or anything there by that bridge.
Yeah, that virtual bridge. Look at that. Well, I thought San Francisco is a kind of appropriate because I've worked with a lot of bands that are from that area. So,
Yeah, well, looks good. Um, So you've been a Sonar artist for 35 years, and we did this back in 2016, and at the time, if I remember right, you were using all backline gear. The touring you were doing at the time, the artists weren't taking the backline with them, so you really weren't getting much of a chance to play Sonar. At
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't remember exactly what I was doing at that moment, but yeah, it's been sort of a an ongoing thing with Sonar. They a lot of backline companies don't have Sonar. They don't have it available. So whenever I get in a position where I'm doing a gig and they're not taking our own gear with us, then I have to send a rider, which the rider always has Sonar gear on it. And but if they don't have it, there's no I'm just sort of stuck. And I've talked to Sonar many times about it. It's just kind of how it is sometimes. I always try to get it, but it's not always available.
Gotcha.
And
Well, on your
that's still the case, unfortunately. But I
yeah.
talked to Jerry Goldenson about it at NAM, and he's they're trying to get that rectified to as much as they can. But it's I'm sure it has to do with budgets and all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, when you've got as many artists as drum companies do, it just kind of seems impractical to be able to play something for everybody everywhere they're going that, isn't dragging their own gear around. So,
Right. I mean, Sonar themselves are not really, they're not in a position to be housing gear all over the country. I mean, some of the places that we go and play shows at are, off the beaten path. It's
mhm.
they're not just going to have gear available, and a lot of the times, whoever the uh, production company is that's been hired to do the show, providing it's not just the drum gear. They're providing guitar amps and whatever else is needed for the show for the whole band. um, they have to Sonar has to sort of get involved with all those companies. And in a lot of areas there are big companies, like SIR or
Hmm.
Soundcheck or whatever, that have tons of gear and that they're sort of the go-to backline company in whatever area they're in. But that isn't always the case. If you
Hmm.
go someplace in, I don't know, somewhere in like, the middle of the country where it's not really necessarily close to a big city or whatever, they have to do whatever they can. So,
Hmm.
but
Well,
usually I wind up with something decent. It's just I prefer it. I would always prefer it to be Sonar though, because they're amazing.
sure, gotcha, totally. Um, so last time we talked, and up until a few years ago, uh, I don't think you'd acquired any new gear. You think you'd had your stuff for quite a while and you really weren't touring with any of it. It was basically at your studio or whatever. And the Steve Miller Band recently, a couple years ago, acquired an SQ2 set. So how was that to get back with touring with Sonar again on your main gig?
Well, when I joined the Steve Miller Band, first of all, Steve, him or his company, whatever, they own all of the gear that we tour with. So the keyboards, all the guitars, all the monitor system, the front of house mixing desk, all that stuff travels, in a truck. And when I first joined the band, I was asked to just use what they had, which they had been using a Tempest drum set for, I don't know, 20 or 30 years or something. And that's what they had. And so I just had to play that, which was fine. They were good drums. And they have they had everything dialed into their rig, so like they had internal drum mics and everything was sort of, in place. They had ways to mount overhead mics off of the cymbal stands and stuff like that. So it was all tightly integrated into their production, and they didn't really want to upset the apple cart, by me just bringing in my stuff. So, which I understood, and it's fine. I was glad to be asked to do the gig, and it's a great gig, and I'm still thrilled to be doing it. Um, so what wound up happening was, let's see, it's almost 2 years ago now. We were going in the studio. We were doing a run of shows, and we finished up at, I think it was at Pine Knob in Detroit. And we were going down to Sweetwater Studios in Fort Wayne, Indiana. They've got a big studio facility there at their giant, and the campus is amazing. They've got, all the stuff that they sell in their warehouses, and there's performance stages and a giant like restaurants. It's amazing. Anyway, we were going there to record, and we decided to use. They've got a wide selection of drums there at the studio. We decided to use, and there was a Sonor SQ1 set there. So we decided to use that instead of the Rode kit, the drum, because we didn't need to use the internal mics or any of that. It was all going to be mic'd in a studio setting.
Mhm.
And so my tech, Tyler, he went in a day or so before and set up the SQ1 kit. And Steve went in on setup day, which, nobody was really expecting him to do that. And none of us were there. And Tyler told me, he played the drums there, and Steve heard him, and Steve really liked the way they sounded. And so then the next day we started recording, and Steve seemed to like them, and all that was good. So not long after that, some Tyler and some of the other guys on the crew had wanted to get new drums anyway because they were, they'd been around for a while. So the production manager Brett talked to Steve and said, well, we can get these Sonor drums, and I worked with you actually and got some prices and stuff that, because Steve wanted to own them, and so he approved that, and we wound up getting them, and now we have an SQ2 kit, which is amazing. Sounds great. Thank you for your help with that.
Sure.
And I get to play those every night on the gig, which is fantastic. And then subsequent to that, I wound up talking to Sonor, and I got a SQ2 kit here for my studio as well. So
So are you doing a lot of studio work?
it's sometimes it's super busy, sometimes it's crickets.
Mhm.
It's just like it's the music business.
Sure. So,
So
uh,
yeah, I do a fair amount. You know, it's lately it hasn't been as much. I just did a run of like I don't know, like 6 weeks or something on the road with three different bands actually. Some of it was Steve, and then I worked with Greg Rollie on a something called the Rock Legends Cruise, which Todd Zuckerman was on that with Styx, and I got to see his SQ2 kit on there, and which is gorgeous. And and then I do some shows with my buddies from Creedence, um, in a band called Revisiting Creedence. So I was jumping around between the three bands for about 6 weeks there. So that was good.
so with your SQ2s at your home studio, how are you liking those compared
Oh,
to
they're
your,
great.
yeah. And you're using a compressor snare drum, is that right?
I have a compressor, and then I also have the just I can't show it to you. It's right behind me, but I have the one that the SQ2 snare drum that
Okay.
matches the drums. So yeah, I have both of those are the newest ones that I have. Yeah. All right.
So let's go back in time a little bit.
Okay.
Prior to becoming a Sonor endorser, you owned a Yamaha kit, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
All right.
Yamaha recording series, recording custom. There were cherry red or something like that.
Well, those are awesome drums, and that's a beautiful color. And that was always one that was kind of, something earlier in my years I kind of wanted to get, but I never did that. But anyway.
Yeah, well, that was, at the time, this was in the 80s. That was, Steve Gadd played those and Vinnie
Hmm.
Colaiuta was playing those. So I thought, well, if those guys are using them, that's the reason why you have an endorser, right? Because other guys are going to look at what the great players are using and want to use something similar theoretically. That's the whole point, right? So I got a recording custom kit when I lived in LA. Yeah, and I actually used that kit when I first got in Cher's band. If you see the clips on the MTV Music Awards from 1989, I'm playing the Yamaha recording custom kit on that. And then I became a Sonor endorser a few months later. I actually tried to get a Yamaha endorsement, and the guy at the time said, yeah, send me a tape. And I was like, I just got this gig. I'm playing on the MTV Awards with like 16 million people, and half the guys that auditioned for the gig were Yamaha endorsers. Why do I have to send you a tape? I just thought it was kind of weird. So I just never pursued it after that.
Well, if I remember the rest of the story correctly, you weren't even wanting any gear, were you? You were just
No,
wanting,
yeah, I just wanted some support. I already had the drums. I just wanted some support if I needed some spare parts or whatever on the road,
yeah.
wanted to kind of be part of the family and have a contact, to be able to support the touring,
That's an
Uh,
element I don't think a lot of people understand about endorsements is the support end of it. It's not about necessarily getting free gear or being in the magazines or whatever. There's a lot of, you know, uh, while you're out on the road, you can't necessarily rely on, Guitar Center to have
yeah,
whatever piece broke last night or whatever you left in the last city by accident or whatever.
yeah. Well, I've never left anything in the last city, thankfully, but it's more like if something breaks or you need like spare parts or whatever, that sort of thing. You can have
Hmm.
them sent to a venue or sent to the hotel or something like that. I've had cymbals from Zildjian sent to, whatever hotel I'm at, if I needed them or whatever. And so, that's really a big part of having an endorsement relationship is having somebody who's in part of the artist team at whatever company it is, and they, it's a way to help support what you're doing.
Hmm.
So,
So with all the other companies that were out there at the time, what led you to Sonar after realizing Yamaha wasn't gonna come through for you?
well, it wasn't that I didn't like go out and actively search for a drum company to get an endorsement with. What wound up happening was the next. So when I first got in Cher's band, it was like summer, I want to say like July or something of 89. And we did a bunch of stuff for a couple months, like August, September. And then she took some time off to do a movie. And we didn't start up again until the following, I think it was February or March. And and then we did like a big tour in 1990, all over the world. And but in the interim, I wound up two of the guys. One of a very good friend of mine is Dave Amato. He's a guitar player. He played with me in Cher's band, and he plays in REO Speedwagon for the last 35 years. He actually got the Cher gig and the REO gig the same week, which is
Really?
sort of amazing. Anyway, and then Paul Merkovich, who he's now the MD for The Voice. He was in Cher's band. We all joined Cher's band at the same time, and so Paul and me and Dave and Ricky Phillips, who's a bass player I've worked a lot with. He played with Styx and the Babies and Bad English and all kinds of bands. And then Brett Tuggle, who I was in the David Lee Roth band with, and among other things. We did a thing at the NAMM show in January of 1990. We played in it was the Korg booth basically, but at that time, Korg was the U.S. distributor for Marshall and Sonor, and as well as Korg keyboards. So I played Sonor drums in the booth, and Dave was a Marshall endorser. He may have been the one that hooked the whole thing up. We played, I don't know, like uh, several sets, and it was all Beatles songs we played. But anyway, that's where I became introduced to Sonor, and uh, I met the head guys who worked for Korg USA at the time, who were the artist guys in the US. And then I also met so those guys, that was Carl Dussman, and I think it was Bob Sadlowski was there then. And then uh, the German guys were Oliver Link and Karl-Heinz Menzel.
Mhm.
And I met Carl, I think, at that NAMM show. Anyways, and that was where um, the whole idea of becoming a Sonor endorser came up, and that was where I first played the drums. And so out of that thing, I wound up getting a Sonor a highlight exclusive kit with the copper hardware, and it was black diamond finish, which is black with the sparkles in it. And that is what I used on the Cher tour for the rest of 1990, and then subsequent tours with her in 91 and 92. And then I used it with the Storm, and used it a little bit with David Lee Roth, I think. But then with Dave, I wound up getting a designer kit. But anyway, yeah, that's how I got with Sonor.
So when you saw the Sonor stuff at the Korg booth for the first time, what was your initial thought? Did it just look like another brand of drums, or did you look at it and think, wow, this is really special?
uh, well, the highlight exclusive kit was gorgeous. It was really
Hmm.
impressive looking to see it, and especially to see it in person. um and then I played them, and they sounded great. It took me a minute to get used to the way their hardware worked at the time. And at that time they only had the slotted tuning lugs,
Hmm.
which took me a second to get used to. But and initially I was resistant to those. I was like, oh, this is just weird. But then I realized it's actually really good, and you could actually tune those drums. If you didn't have a key handy, you could get a quarter and just turn the lugs.
Yeah.
So I realized that there were some advantages to it, but also they were just really well machined. They really held the tuning, and they were really well done. So you don't know that necessarily until you really start using them. And so and they sounded great. They sounded like cannons, just
Hmm.
really they were easy to play, and the hardware was just so sturdy, so really just the stands and everything, they're like tanks.
Oh yeah.
So, so that was good. A lot of other hardware, you know, depending on the company and the model or whatever, was flimsy by comparison, you know. So yeah, and I just got into the whole thing, the whole uh German engineering. The shells were beautiful. Everything about them just, they were just really, really well done. I actually wound up with a second highlight exclusive kit in black. And the way I wound up getting those was Korg had a warehouse in Canoga Park out in LA.
Mhm.
And they were wanting to clear out some stuff, and they had a bunch of that in their warehouse. So I just went out there and looked at it and grabbed a bunch of it. And by the way, those first two highlight exclusive kits, I didn't get those for free. I was not a quote unquote full endorser or
Hmm.
whatever at that time. I just I bought those. I got a discount on them, but but I bought all that stuff. Uh, and that was when, after I got that stuff, then I wound up having a pretty big collection of the highlight exclusive stuff, because those are big drum kits, two bass drums, quite a few rack toms, a couple of floor toms. I even had a gong bass drum, so, which I never even used. But anyway, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I was up in uh, we had a rehearsal place in Petaluma, California, where we rehearsed with the Storm, and Oliver Link was out in California for some reason up in the Bay Area, and we got together for lunch. one day when I was up there rehearsing, and he showed me the original drawings of the designer series kit. This is before anybody had seen him. And my green designer series kit that I still have, the one that has the foreigner logo heads on it, was one of the first ones. And it was after I saw him at that when we got had lunch together, then I put together what I wanted to get. And I was one of the first ones to get a designer kit. I don't know if I was the first, but it was one of the first. And I used that on the David Lee Roth tour. That was one of the first tours that those drums went out on. And then I used them with Foreigner too. And uh, so that I saw those drawings. It probably was 92, 93. And then I got the drums in the first part of 94 when I first joined Dave's band.
So, what was Oliver's level of excitement showing you that? Because I mean, that was just
He
way,
was he was ecstatic. He couldn't wait to show it to me.
that was just so far beyond. And there's really nobody else out there doing what Sonar's doing in the way of the hardware and the acoustic gate and all that stuff.
He showed me all the features like the swiveling legs and all of the round you know, it was all round stuff like for the cymbal tilters and all the, all the tuning pegs on the bass drum and on the
Hmm.
as all that stuff. It was really cool.
Well, how did you feel looking at all that? Were you excited? Surely you would have been.
Oh yeah, I was thrilled. I thought it was pretty innovative, and I was, it was kind of like getting a sneak peek, um,
Yeah.
curtain, which was great. So yeah, it was cool.
Well, that green stain, that was when they came out with the catalog. That was either on the front or back of I think the front of the catalog, and it looked pretty.
Mhm.
But when you actually saw it in person, I remember going up in the late '90s to HSS when Rusty Martin was still up there, and he took me on a tour and pulled one of those designer toms. It was like it was probably a 10-inch tom, and I just couldn't believe how
Yeah,
detailed the grain was in that green stain.
yeah, I have a whole set of green stain and a whole set of red stain.
The red
Stain.
stain's nice too, but the green stain just really, and I'm not a green guy. I don't
Yeah, me.
gravitate. Yeah. But just something about that particular way they did that was just
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. Well, the red's gorgeous too, and both of the drum sets that I have, those designer kits are huge. They're two bass drums and I don't know 4 or 5 rack toms and a couple of floor toms.
So what'd you get on your SQ2s?
Much smaller. I got it's basically just like the ones I got on the road with Steve. It's a 10 and a 12 rack, 22-inch kick, and 14 and 16 toms, and a couple snare drums. I didn't want to get the giant double bass drum kit. I don't need that anymore. So
What's It's kind of funny, thinking back in 1990, how big of an act Cher still was.
yeah,
And the fact that on that kind of a tour you're having to pay even a heavily discounted price, just kind of but
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if the Sonar guys knew or cared how big she was at that time. But we did a lot of stuff. I used that on the MTV. Oh, no, I didn't use that on MTV Awards. I'm sorry, that was before I was a Sonar endorser. But the next year, I did. We did a bunch of TV. We played all arenas and big, outdoor amphitheaters, and we went all over Europe and Japan. Oh, not Japan, Australia, and in Australia, one of the shows we did was at the Adelaide Grand Prix, which I think it's now in Melbourne. But anyway, at the time, the Grand Prix was in Adelaide, and there's 100,000 people at that show. So it got in front of a lot of people, and there was a live concert that we shot at the Mirage, which you can still see. I think it's on YouTube. Cher live at the Mirage, Cher Extravaganza live at the Mirage, something like that. And you can see Dave Amato is playing on that, and Paul Merkovich, and the bass player. It was a funny thing actually about that band. The I used to before Cher just got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I think last year. But prior to that, there were two people in that band who were inducted into the Hall of Fame before her, which I always thought was hilarious. The bass player is a guy named Hugh McDonald, good buddy of mine. He's inducted with Bon Jovi because he's been with them for many years. And Darlene Love was one of the backup singers, and she was inducted years ago to the Hall of Fame for all her work, in the 60s with Phil Spector and all that stuff. But anyway, there you go. Now there's three people from that band in the Hall of Fame.
So what else have you got going on these days?
Still working with Steve, Steve Miller Band. We're not working right now. We just did some rehearsals and a couple shows in February, but we're going back out in August. And then my understanding is that there's going to be some other stuff after that, but I don't know all the dates or anything yet. But still doing that. And then I work, do some studio stuff here occasionally, and then I work with my buddy Kurt Griffey, who's a good friend of mine. He and I worked together with the guys from Creedence Clearwater Revival. I actually filled in for Doug Clifford, who's the original drummer from CCR. He and Stu Cook, the original bass player, had a band called Creedence Clearwater Revisited, and I did a bunch of touring with them. Kurt and I go back, I don't know, since 1999, I think is when we started working together, and we played together in a couple of other bands. He was in the Greg Rollie band. I got him in that, probably 2001 or something like that. And he left to join CCR, so I wound up doing some stuff with that. And out of that, um, the singer who joined Creedence Clearwater Revisited, I forget when he joined, but his name is Dan McGinnis. He and Kurt, when Stu and Doug decided to retire from doing that, Kurt and Dan wanted to continue, and so they asked me to play, and we have a band called Revisiting Creedence. So I do that occasionally. It's basically, we're doing the Creedence catalog the same way that we did it when we were doing it with Stu, but Stu's not there now. So and so I got a bunch of stuff. Actually playing with them next week in Niagara Falls at Falls View. And then we got a bunch of stuff. And then whenever Steve is working, if they have gigs, I get somebody to cover that for me. Um, and I do that, and occasionally with some other bands that call. The band that I met Kurt with was a sort of like an all-star band. It had Randy Meisner from the Eagles and Denny Lane from Wings and a couple of guys from Steppenwolf, and that band is still does some things occasionally. It's got a different lineup now, but they call me every now and then. I've done a handful of shows with them, and uh, Greg Rollie, we just did a couple shows. Like I was saying, Greg's the original keyboard player and singer from Santana and Journey, founding member, one of the very few people to have been inducted into the Hall of Fame twice, because he's inducted with Santana and Journey, because he's a founding member of both of those bands. Anyway, Kurt and I work with Greg sometimes, if he's up for doing stuff, and just other than that, I trade stocks and options, which, oh man, the last 2 days, what a nightmare. But yeah, I stay busy, and I do some stuff with Marcy, my girlfriend, Marcy Request. We made a couple records. We've got Matt Bissonette playing on that from Elton John, and Matt's worked with everybody, Joe Satriani, and uh, you know, he's plays with the REO guys now, and Wally Minko, who's an incredible keyboard player. He's played with, I don't know, everybody, Jean-Luc Ponty, Arturo Sandoval, Pink, En Vogue, Tony Braxton. I mean, he's incredible, and a bunch of other guys. Kurt plays on some of that stuff too. So I've always got something going on, or
Mhm.
try to anyway. Keep all the balls in the air.
So do you still enjoy life on the road when you're out touring?
Sure, yeah, it's fun. Absolutely, it's I mean, I don't know, I feel very blessed to have been able to do this for as long as I have. It's I don't know. I don't know, 40 years or 40 plus years I've been traveling. Probably what, like, geez, I started doing road gigs in the late 70s. So, you know,
Hmm.
over 40 years.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I don't have to go to an office every day and fight traffic. Sometimes we got to fight traffic, but you know, I'm very fortunate to have been able to do this for a living for as long as I have. So I'm very grateful.
So how do you enjoy your gig with the Steve Miller Band? I've seen y'all live a couple of times and really enjoy, his music has always been very interesting to me anyway, and you're rock solid with the band and
Oh,
I,
thanks.
I enjoy it very much. So what's that gig like for you?
Well, it's great. I mean, the band is great. Everybody in the band is a really good player. When I joined that band, it was sort of it's very last minute. The drummer who had been in the band before me, Gordy Knudsen, is a great drummer. He had been in the band for 33 years. And there was a show at Jones Beach Amphitheater. It was a benefit for Tunnel to Towers Foundation, and it was the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So this was being filmed to be aired on 9/11. It was done in August 21st, in fact, of 2021. And so I got a call 2 days before that show from Steve's manager at the time, Scott Bourret. And I've known Scott for a long time. He worked with the Storm. He was one of our managers in the Storm, and worked with Greg Rollie. And so anyway, so Scott called me and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" This was a Thursday morning, August 19th. I remember. He called me up and said, "Hey, what are you doing Saturday?" And I said, "I don't know. What am I doing Saturday?" So he explained that Gordy had uh, something that had come up that was going to prevent him from going and doing that show. So I said, "Yeah, they gave me. Fortunately it was a show where there's a lot of bands on the bill, so it was a short set. We only had to do 5 songs, but they gave me the the list of songs. So I spent the rest of that day learning those songs and transcribing them and practicing them and kind of trying to get myself, to a place where I knew what the basic structure and cues were. And then the next day I got up at like 6 in the morning and flew to New York for the show. And that night we had a rehearsal slash sound check. We had 1 hour on the stage. So this is the day before the show. This was the Friday night. And I also had to become accustomed to the gear, the gear I told you about earlier, the Tempest
Hmm.
drum. Yeah, we have a personal monitor system that we use. And I don't know, we had like an hour on the stage. I think we had like 15 minutes where I got the gear together, and then I played the songs with the band, but Steve wasn't there. It was just the band and crew. Steve was I don't know where he was, but anyway, we got through everything, and they kind of gave me an idea of what to expect when Steve would be there and what the cues would be, or if there were cues. And got through all that, and then at the end of that, Scott walked up and he says, "Hey, Steve Miller would like to say hello to you." He, turned out that Steve had been watching the whole thing on like a FaceTime video or whatever. And he handed me the phone. And I was like, "Hey, Steve," and it was very nice, and he was, very appreciative. He's glad that I was able to come in and do the gig at the last minute. And so that was my first show, and I've been doing it ever since. And the band and all the guys in the crew are fantastic. Um, Joseph Wooten is the keyboard player. He's amazing. He's sort of like the de facto MD, and he and I are on behind the frontline guys, and so we can see each other, and he can help me out with or I don't need that anymore, but in the beginning he could help me out with whatever was coming up. Anyway, so Joseph and Kenny Lee Lewis is the bass player. I've known Kenny actually since the mid '80s. I used just from being in LA, and we played together a few times back then. And the other guitar player is Jacob Peterson. Anyway, all the guys and the guys in the crew were all super helpful, helped me get through everything. And then a couple of weeks after that show, we did the first uh, full length shows, where it was like 90, 100 minutes or whatever, playing all the stuff. So I had to, go back and learn all that stuff, and never did have any rehearsals, except for whatever we would do at sound check, which wasn't much. I got to learn the lay of the land with the way the band and the whole organization works, and it's been great. We've done some amazing stuff. I've gotten to last year we did a whole stadium tour with Journey and Def Leppard, which was awesome. We played some huge baseball stadiums, Wrigley Field and Fenway Park.
Well, y'all had a little misadventure in Atlanta. Your drum tech overheated. How is he, by the way? Is he back working again and all that?
Yeah, we were on the stadium tour. The very first show was in Atlanta, and you were there,
Hmm.
Truist Park. Yeah, he overheated. He wound up having a stroke, a minor stroke, and so he missed the rest of the stadium tour. And he did come back. That was in July of last year. He came back to the band in September. Took a couple months to recuperate and all that. And he's back, and he's doing great as far as I know. But yeah, it was super hot that day. And Steve was kind of overheating too. It was sort of a dangerous kind of heat, but anyway, we got through it.
Well, he looked heavily dressed. I didn't know if he was packing an air conditioning unit underneath that big old heavy coat or
Steve had
what.
like an ice pack around his neck. I think that's probably why it looked that way.
Really?
He
Okay.
was trying to like keep himself cooled down.
Yeah, it was
And then
warm.
after that, we wound up getting more like air conditioning fans, cooling units for the shows that were really hot.
Well, I'll tell you how hot it was. It was so hot that I watched y'all, and then I watched about half of Journey, and I left. I said, you know what? I've seen half of them, and I saw Def Leppard in Florida a few years ago. I'm gonna go find some air conditioning, and that's exactly
Yeah,
what I did, and I have no regrets. I was
yeah.
there to see y'all, and it was an amazing show, and the drums
Thank you.
sounded great, and y'all
Thank
did
you.
great. Did you ever have any glitches in the early days getting going with Steve?
The very first song I ever played with Steve, uh, he, somehow I don't know what happened, but it was a song called "I Want to Make the World Turn Around," and I think somehow inadvertently his delay pedal, the one for "Fly Like an Eagle," got hit, and I don't know how. Probably what happened was in the set change with because whoever was on before us, I don't remember who was on before us. Then our gear had to go out on the stage. Maybe at that point somehow the wrong delay pedal. These kinds of things happen occasionally. So
Mhm.
the way that song is supposed to start is there's sort of like a swell, and Steve plays this stuff on the guitar, and he uses a delay to kind of set the tempo. So he plays this line, do 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 do, and then the delay repeats, da 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 da, right? And so I get the tempo from that. And we always set the delays at sound check, but for whatever reason, the wrong pedal was on. So none of us really kind of knew what was happening there. So I just, at some point, at a certain point, there's a drum fill that happens and it brings the band in. So I just played the drum fill and where I thought it was supposed to be, and it all worked out. After that, Joseph actually was kind of funny. He says that's when I knew you were the right guy for the band because you were able to solve the problem in real time. And with our band, Steve is he comes from the whole blues world, where there's a lot of jamming and you know off the cuff. You got to be able to follow each other. Keep
Mhm.
you know hear where he's going to play, or hear what he wants to do, and or take a cue that, and sometimes those things are different, just depending on how he's feeling. He may want to play an extended solo, or whatever. So our gig is really just, we really have to listen to each other, especially to Steve, and where he wants to go with whatever he's doing. So, and sometimes those things are, it's a technical thing, like what happened with that delay pedal. Those, it's it's the kind of thing that over the years as a musician, if you've done enough gigs, you are able to compensate and figure those things out on the fly. If you haven't done a lot of gigs, it's a little more difficult to do that. Um, so with our band, sometimes Steve will he'll just play a solo, or whatever, in a spot that we're not used to. Not that it's wrong, it's just what he's feeling at that time.
Hmm.
And so you just have to be able to adapt and go with those things. It makes the gig kind of fun, because you're not, it's not something you can do by rote. It's not like a lot of bands now, especially they're using like computers, and everything's on a click, and everything is the exact same arrangement every single night. And that's not like that with us. Steve changes up the set, changes up the arrangement sometimes. Sometimes we discuss it, sometimes it just happens. He's even called one time, he called a song that I had never heard before.
Oh, wow.
This is my second full gig, so my third gig with the band. Um, he went on the mic and said, he goes, I think I want to change the set. And I just looking at him, and he turns around to me, and I went, and he goes, why not? So he starts talking about this song to the audience, and there's a song called Cow Cow Calculator, and which we've played since then, but at the time I had never heard it. Um, it's from one of his early albums. And Joseph, the keyboard player, was like air drumming the part to me, and he says, I'll count you in, because Steve starts that song with a guitar thing. And so after he played the thing that he plays, Joseph counted me into, and then we just played the song, and it was cool. And it was, that's the kind of thing, like what I mean, where if you've done enough gigs, you can kind of hear stuff as it's happening, and just be able to play it. It may not be perfect or whatever, but you can adapt to what's going on. And so at the time, I thought, I wonder if this is a test, because it was only my second full gig with the band. I didn't know if Steve was like wanting to see if I could do it or whatever. But it sounded fine. I don't think anybody there would have known. Um, and uh, I said that to Joseph. He goes, "No, I don't think it was a test." He says, "I think it was just that Steve felt comfortable with you, and he felt like
Mhm.
he could do that, and you'd be okay." So anyway, yeah, stuff like that happens, and it's to me it makes the gig more interesting, kind of more fun. We uh, fly by the seat of our pants.
Uh, you bring up some interesting points, and it brings me to a new question.
Okay.
So, like when you're in the situation where the delay's wrong, so I can't even imagine for a guy like me that's not a seasoned touring drummer. I would probably go into panic mode, and I think I'd eventually get a handle on it, but to start with, that adrenaline would be spiking. Do you have moments like that? You're like having a oh shit moment, or were you just calm and cool through the whole thing, or what?
Well, I mean, at the time, at that particular incident, I mean, I just, what are you going to do? There's 10,000 people out there, and the cameras, there's TV cameras and all this stuff. You just have to kind of, as the drummer, there are certain things, that you have to kind of lead.
Mm-hmm.
That's the case in any gig that you're doing. The drums, I mean, the drums kind of like set up sections and stuff. So I knew that I had to play that fill. I just had to figure out a spot where it would work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, just wound up doing that as long as, you have communication with the other guys in the band, you look at or whatever, and you make it obvious what you're doing, at least in that instance. It's just, I think that just comes with, experience. It's just, I could have been totally wrong, but I think the other guys are also experienced enough to know, well, okay, he's playing the fill now. That's where we're coming in. And Steve is super experienced too. I mean, he's been doing this for, forever,
Yeah.
so he knows how to adapt if something goes wrong. I think that's a big part of it. Everybody in the band, has enough experience to be able to adapt and deal with whatever comes up, you know. And that's the case in most of the bands that I work with, not just Steve's band. We with Greg Rollie, everybody in that band is really, really high level players, and something goes wrong, you just you go wherever you have to go.
Now, Creedence Clearwater Revisited, was that not a another really short notice gig for you?
Yeah, that was uh let's see, Doug called me. Doug threw his back out was the first time, and that was August of 2013. That's when that was. Uh, he called me on like a Sunday, and I think there was like three shows, like Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So I had to fly on Wednesday, something like that. So, but there was like 20 songs to learn, and
Mm-hmm.
when you learn those songs, you don't just like basically learn the songs. You got to learn all the little details,
Mm-hmm.
the all the little hits and stuff. So my process for that is uh, I write it all out. I know how to read music and write myself little charts, and then I take those charts and I scan them and I put them into an app on my iPad called Fourscore, so that I can read them. And the nice thing about having them on an app on an iPad is that they stay lit when the stage goes dark. But anyway, and I can just hit the side of the pad and it goes to the next song. So I put them in order of the set. Uh, anyway, so yeah, so he called me on a Wednesday and had to learn all the songs, and then oh, no, sorry, he called me on a Sunday, flew on a Wednesday, and then learned all the songs. Then when I got to, I think the first show was in Philadelphia, and I got there and I got together with Kurt in his room and kind of went over everything, and and then the next day we just had sound check, went over some stuff at sound check, and then did the show. We did three in a row. We played Philadelphia. I think then the next show was in Omaha, so we flew the day of the show, played in Omaha, and then played in Iowa. So we busted from Omaha to, I think it was Clear Lake, Iowa, or something like that. And uh, then I didn't play with them again for like another, I think it was the following year, and got another last minute call, but at least at that point I had done it once. So I just took my charts that I already had on my iPad and went and did it. And then I wound up doing a whole year with them because, as it turned out, Doug had had gotten, I think it was throat cancer, some kind of cancer. So he had to have like chemo and radiation treatments and stuff like that. So I filled in for most of, well, the rest of 2014 and then most of 2015. Oh, actually, all of 2015. He did do a handful of things on that, but even then, when he came back to do the shows, they had me go just in case he couldn't do them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did a few more in 16. I wound up doing shows. Um, he did come back to the band, I think, mainly in 16, but there was still a handful of times when he couldn't make it or like didn't want to do the travel, whatever it was. Or he had to have another treatment, whatever. And so I wound up doing shows with them the rest of the time, 16, 17, 18, 19, a handful of shows here and there, and they were really cool, super gracious, very great guys, and it was really fun. It's a great catalog of music to play, you know.
Yeah. So in August of 2013, when you first got the call, you've got a few days to learn all these songs and all the intros, outros, and punches and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, were there nerves leading up to the first gig with that, or how does that work?
Not really. I mean, everybody was super accommodating. Same, just like when I joined Steve's band, everybody was super nice. They asked me if there's anything I wanted to go over at sound check, which there was probably a handful of things where I wasn't exactly clear how they did it, so we would go over those things. The one of the differences with that band is that they tend to stick to the arrangements pretty so that what I could read the charts and I knew where I was in the song, as long as my charts were accurate. So that was fairly straightforward. It was more getting used to you know how they did it. Uh, it's one thing to practice the songs, at home. It's another thing to be on the stage and understand how they're doing things and certain cues or whatever. But once you get used to that, it's pretty straightforward, you know.
Am I correct? Cher was the first really big tour you did. Is that right?
First, yeah, the first like large scale, yeah. I'd done a bunch of other traveling and touring and whatever, but that was the first, big like arena type thing that I did, with a bunch of buses and trucks and all that.
Hmm. So, what are some other standout moments or tours or whatever along the way?
Well, I've been super fortunate and grateful. I mentioned earlier that uh, I joined a band called The Storm, which was with Greg Rollie and Russ Valerie from Journey. And I was taking Steve Smith's place in that band. So we kept the Sonor connection alive in that band. And that was great fun. I did a record with them and we toured with Brian Adams and Peter Frampton and a bunch of other people. And then after that, I joined the David Lee Roth band, which Greg Bissonette referred me to that. I did a year with Dave, and after that, I joined Foreigner and did I don't know 3 or 4 years with them, and then did Richie Sambora, uh, and we went to Japan and Australia and Europe with Richie, and yeah, and then after that, I did started doing the thing with Greg Raleigh, which was I had stayed in touch with him from when we were in the Storm, and then we did a solo record of his, which I co-produced and did a lot of that at my house. That was great fun. Great band too. Alfonso Johnson playing bass and um, anyway, yeah, uh, all that stuff has been fantastic and amazing in different ways, for different reasons, different types of music and different personalities and all that. So yeah, been very fortunate.